This Memorial Weekend, we take a moment to remember the sacrifice of our fallen military heroes.
Remembering those who lost their lives for us.
Boston's talk station remembers.
Recently, Pastor Rafael Cruz, the father of Senator Ted Cruz, was in Foxborough at an event sponsored by the Massachusetts Republican Assembly, and he gave a speech that brought the House down. Hear and listen to Pastor Rafael Cruz.
And I gotta tell you, when we had him on, and he was speaking in that charming Cuban accent of his, the phone lines were melting. The text machine, I was almost going to sue this poor man. The text machine was burning up with people. I thought the text machine was going to blow. Everybody was saying, who is this guy? He should be the next president of the United States. And I swear, Cosi and Brittany were texting back to our listeners saying, no, his son is going to be the next president of the United States. Just very quickly. This man, to me, is very dear to my heart, and I'll tell you why. As you know, my father, my mother, my grandparents fled communism. It wasn't Cuba, it was Croatia, Eastern Europe. And just like this man, they came to the New World, searching for a better life, for freedom, for liberty, for opportunity, to breathe the air, the clean air of freedom. He fled communist Cuba as a young man. He came to this country with nothing, just like my father, just like my mother, except he had one thing, the will. A will to succeed, a desire to work hard, to pull himself up by the bootstraps, love this country, love its constitution, love its history, and love its freedom. And he created a beautiful life and a successful life for his son, for his family, and for himself. And now, if you want to see how great this country is, this man, this refugee of communism, of tyranny, his son is now not only a U.S. Senator from the great state of Texas, but he is literally one of the most influential, prominent senators we have in the country today. And God willing, the next president of the United States. This man is the embodiment of the American dream. To me, he is the symbol of everything I stand for, what our show stands for, what Kuhner country stands for. So please, everybody, give Pastor Rafael Cruz a warm Massachusetts welcome. Thank you. Please be seated.
Well, I want to start by telling you about a brand new, very exhaustive research study that was done by a very prestigious university in the United States. And they came to the conclusion that Barack Obama was the 5th best president of the United States. The 5th best president in the United States. And these were the results of the study. Washington, Lincoln, and Reagan were tied for number 1. There were 16 presidents tied for number 2. 23 presidents tied for number 3. Jimmy Carter was number 4. And Barack Obama was number 5. And actually, before I start, we heard from all these wonderful candidates, and I'll tell you, Massachusetts is not off limit to turn it red. So I want to say something on behalf of Jeff and all the other candidates that are here. And I'm going to quote the words of a great senator from the state of Texas, Senator Phil Graham. And Senator Phil Graham used to say, I got good news and I got bad news. The good news is all these candidates have all the money they need for their campaigns. The bad news is it's still in your pocket. So write a check. Anyway, it is so great to be in this beautiful state of Massachusetts. And I'm really encouraged when I see all these strong conservative Republicans running for office. And I was very encouraged when Jeff told me that in the last couple of elections you doubled the number of state reps that are Republican. Well, all we have to do is double them a couple more times and you'll have a majority. So the trend is in the right direction. Anyway, I'm so pleased to be here. As Jeff was saying, I was born in Cuba. Grew up under a strong military dictatorship, very oppressive, a lot of corruption. And the revolution started in the high schools and the universities. So I found myself involved in a revolution as a teenager. I remember during that time a young charismatic leader rose up talking about hope and change. His name was Fidel Castro. And we all followed him. We thought he was going to be our liberator. Little did we know. Well, as a result of my involvement in the revolution, I was captured, I was imprisoned, I was tortured, but by the grace of God, I was released. And I had no choice but to leave Cuba. I was being followed. I couldn't put my parents in peril. So the easiest way to leave the country was with a student visa. I wrote to 3 universities in the United States. The first university to accept me was the University of Texas. So with my acceptance letter from the University of Texas, I went to the U.S. consulate, got a 4-year student visa, and came to the United States legally on a 4-year student visa. Went to school full-time, worked full-time, and then about a year and 3 months later, on January of 1959, Castro took over. So that June I went back to Cuba, and I got the shock of my life. That same man that had been talking about hope and change was now talking about how the rich were evil, about how they oppressed the poor, and about the need to redistribute the wealth. He began confiscating private property, began attacking freedom of the press, began shutting down newspapers, radio stations, television stations, began attacking the church. Then he began attacking the educational system. My mother was a school teacher. And they put out an edict to all public schools that they had to teach Marxism in the public schools. I am so very proud of what my mother did when that edict came to that school. My mother was a 6th grade teacher. She faked an attack of insanity in her class. In front of all the students, she was running up and down, foaming at the mouth, pulling her hair out, just acting like a crazy nut. And so she was able to be dismissed by reason of insanity. Her statement was, I would rather make a fool of myself in front of everyone than poison the minds of children with communist indoctrination. So anyway, I came back from Cuba, back to the States, never to return again. But so grateful to be in the greatest country on the face of the earth. I'm so proud to be an American. This is, without a doubt, the greatest country on the face of the earth. And I just decided that I will make the best of it. You know, It is so sad to hear our president trying to convince us that this is not an exceptional country. But this is absolutely an exceptional country. You know, Horatio Alger stories are a dime a dozen in this country. Anyone with hard work and perseverance can achieve any dream they have. I remember there's a scripture in the book of Proverbs that has served me well for many, many years. And it says, though the righteous falls 7 times, he gets up again. Now all of us are going to stumble and fall, but when we fall, we have 2 choices. We either can stay down there feeling sorry for ourselves, or we can get up with twice the determination. If we do that, there's nothing that can stop us. So it's all right if you ran and I wasn't successful, just try again. Remember what Winston Churchill said? Never, 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 never give up. So I even had people that said, well, you're a foreigner. You're going to be discriminated against. And I said, well, that doesn't bother me at all. All I have to do, if I'm competing with somebody else for a job, I have to be twice as good as the other person, so there's no choice. The choice is obvious. It's also served me well. Anyway, I came back to the States, graduated from college, went on to start an oil and gas exploration company. And then in the late 70s, I was shocked again. Do any of you remember the Carter years? 22% interest rates, double-digit inflation, double-digit unemployment, lines around the block to get gasoline, a government so weak in foreign policy that Iran had become so emboldened that they captured 52 Americans and held them hostage for 444 days. You know, I am so proud of my son that just 2 weeks ago, he was able to pass a bill by unanimous decision in the House and in the Senate, making it against the law for a known terrorist to come to the United States as an ambassador. And I am sure that reluctantly, but President Obama had no choice but to sign that bill, because he would have been embarrassed if it had gone back. If he had vetoed it, it would have been overridden because it passed by unanimous decision. Iran had appointed one of those 52 terrorists to come to the United Nations as UN ambassador. And that means to come to New York City with diplomatic immunity. God help us. But you know something? It is not coincidental that those 52 hostages were released the day President Reagan was inaugurated, on the 20th of January 1981. And let me tell you the class of President Reagan. You know who President Reagan appointed to welcome the hostages? Jimmy Carter. That is poetic justice, really. But anyway, I remember, because of Jimmy Carter, I became very heavily involved in Republican politics. I joined an organization called the Religious Roundtable. It was a Judeo-Christian organization, which together with Moral Majority, we mobilized millions of Christians across America to help elect whom I consider the greatest president in the last 150 years, Ronald Reagan, to the White House. And so when my son Ted was 9 years old, he got a dose of it, because every day at the dinner table, all we talked about was why we had to get rid of this leftist Marxist and replace him with a constitutional conservative. And I remember during that time, I must have asked him a dozen times, You know, Ted, when I lost my freedom in Cuba, I had a place to come to. If we lose our freedoms here, where are we going to go? There is no place to go. And that is a very relevant question that each and every one of us needs to ask. Now, quite often I come across people that tell me, oh, we could never lose our freedoms here. We are losing our freedoms here. The difference is this. In Cuba, we lost them overnight. I have a fellow Cuban here, sitting over there. Anyway, we lost our freedoms overnight. Here is happening a little bit at a time. And we keep taking it. Most of us have become complacent. It's like the old story of the frog. You throw a frog in a pot of hot water, that frog is going to jump right out. But you put a frog in a pot of cold water and put it on the stove, and that water is warming up a little at a time, and that frog is comfortable. That frog is complacent, and you can boil that frog to death. And we are being boiled to death just like that frog because of our complacency. It is about time we draw a line in the sand. But anyway, you know, the Bible says that our steps are ordered of the Lord. There's nothing casual on this earth. Everything is causal. You have to move the U. Instead of casual, it's causal. God has a plan for everything. As my son Ted was entering high school, through a client of mine, I was able to introduce Ted to a man by the name of Roland Story. Roland Story was the president of an organization called the Free Enterprise Institute. So now my son is just entering high school. He's reading Milton Friedman. He's reading Adam Smith. He's reading von Mises. He's reading Hayek. He's reading Frederick Bastiat. He's reading the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. And then the Free Enterprise Institute picks 5 kids, of which Ted was one of them, calls them the constitutional corroborators. What a name, man. The constitutional corroborators. And then using what is called a mnemonic device, where these kids would memorize a string of letters, and from that they would recreate the text. These 5 kids memorized the entire U.S. Constitution. For the next 4 years, these 5 kids would go into Rotary clubs all over the state of Texas. Rotary clubs met for lunch. They would put 5 easels in the front of the room, and while people were having lunch, these 5 kids would write the Constitution by memory on those easels. And then they would give a half-hour patriotic speech on free market economics and the Constitution. During the next 4 years, my son gave approximately 80 speeches, about 20 per year for 4 years, on free market economics and the Constitution. Before Ted left high school, he was passionate about the Constitution. He was passionate about the Declaration. He was passionate about free markets and limited government and the rule of law. And that passion became like fire in his bones. And let me tell you, that fire is as alive today as it was over 30 years ago in my son Ted. That's why I know he's not going to compromise in Washington. Because that fire didn't start today. It started over 3 decades ago. But you know, during all that time, both he and I fell in love with the Constitution. You know, we got to realize there's a lot about our history that is being erased from the history books. We have such a tremendous heritage in this country. As a matter of fact, when the Pilgrims came from England, they came for one purpose. They wanted the freedom to worship God. They got to America, not too far from here, and when they arrived, they decided to try a communist experiment. Basically, they said, look, we have all this land before us. Let us all work the land together, and we will share in what the land produces. They almost starved to death. But they were smart enough and flexible enough that they went back to Governor Bradford and they said, this didn't work. So Governor Bradford said, all right, each of you get your own piece of land, you work the land, you feed your family, and the free enterprise system was born in America the second year they were here. Now my question is this: if we tried that experiment over 4 centuries ago and it failed, what will we be so dumb enough to try it again? Doesn't make any sense, does it? George Santayana once said, if we fail to learn the lessons of history, we're doomed to repeat them. Anyway, there is so much that happened during these early years of the revolution. And there's so much that most Americans don't have a clue. Did you know that every grievance in the Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Independence is a series of grievances against King George? Do you know that each and every one of those grievances were preached from the pulpits of America before they were written in the Declaration? It was pastors that started the revolution in the United States. They were the real forefathers of the revolution long before the framers. Pastors like George Whitefield and many others. They were from the pulpit calling out King George for the atrocities that he was perpetrating upon the American people. Now the question is, where are those pastors today? You know where most of them are? Hiding behind their pulpits. Hiding behind their pulpits. God help us. As a matter of fact, you hear, I do pastors' conferences all over the country. In the last 12 months, I've done 24 pastors' conferences all over the United States. And I get a series of excuses from pastors. One is, separation of church and state. Listen, I know the Constitution very well. I know the Declaration very well. Separation of church and state is not in the Constitution. It's not in the Declaration. When this country was being started as a representative constitutional republic, all 13 colonies were concerned that this new government was not going to impose a state religion like they fled from in England. All 13 colonies had the same concern. But the Danbury Baptists expressed that concern to Thomas Jefferson, and so Thomas Jefferson writes him a letter. And first of all, he says in that letter, in matters of faith and religion, no one has the right to interfere. That is between you and God. Period. Very clear. Then he cites the First Amendment of the Constitution. And he says that legislature shall not do anything to impose a state religion or to try to be involved in the free exercise thereof. Citing the First Amendment. And then he says, thus, there is a wall of separation between church and state. If you look at the letter to the Danbury Baptists, it is absolutely clear that Thomas Jefferson was talking about a one-way wall. A one-way wall to keep government from interfering with religion or from establishing a state religion. In no way, shape or form was telling the church not to be involved in society. As a matter of fact, we ought to be an influence in every area of society. As the Church of Jesus Christ, we should be influencing arts and entertainment, sports, the media, or that's one group that needs it, education, business, government. Every year. But I'll tell you, you need to be able to decode the rhetoric. For example, have you heard people in this administration talking about freedom of worship? You heard the term? They don't talk about freedom of religion. They are trying to change the phrase to freedom of worship. Let me tell you what comes after that. What comes after that is what you have in Cuba today. You have freedom of worship in Cuba. Freedom of worship means you can worship inside a house of worship. That means it's confined within the four walls of the church. In Cuba there are sanctioned churches where people can go and they can evangelize inside the church. They can preach. There are spies there to monitor everything that's said, but it is against the law to evangelize outside the four walls of the church. That's where the Obama administration is going, promoting this freedom of worship. Not freedom of religion, freedom of worship. To eradicate religion outside the four walls of the church. To eliminate all the influence on religion upon society. But you know, the Bible says in Proverbs chapter 17, verse 15, it says, "He that justifies the wicked, and he that condemns the righteous, both of them are an abomination to the Lord." He that condemns, he that justifies the wicked, or he that condemns the righteous. Now let me ask you a question. If you are silent, are you not justifying the wicked? Silence is not an option. Edmund Burke once said, all that has to happen for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. Passivity is not a solution. All of those people that didn't vote in the last election, they voted for Obama by not voting. There is another excuse that I get. Oh, God just defined the gospel. What is the gospel? Because the gospel is a lot more than John 3:16. You know, the Apostle Paul said, "My hands are free from the blood of all men because I have not shunned to declare to you the whole counsel of God." That's from cover to cover. And let me tell you, the Bible talks a lot about politics. As a matter of fact, did you know that the Bible tells you exactly who to vote for? Very, very clearly the Bible tells you who to vote for. Let me prove it to you. Let me put it in context. Moses has just crossed the Red Sea. And now Moses is in the wilderness trying to govern 1 million people. And Moses is going bananas. And here comes his father-in-law Jethro. And God speaks through Jethro. And Jethro says, "Moses, what you're doing is not good." And in Exodus chapter 18, verse 21, Jethro says to Moses, "You select from among the people." Now that's the same as you elect from among the people. And now he gives 4 qualifications. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. I'm going to repeat it. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. Now let's define those terms.
You're listening to Pastor Rafael Cruz. He recently gave a speech at an event sponsored by the Massachusetts Republican Assembly.
I lost a lot of good buddies over there. I'm proud I got to serve with them.
Remembering the fallen on Memorial Day.
And that's what today is about.
On AM 680 WRKO.
At a recent event sponsored by the Massachusetts Republican Assembly, Pastor Rafael Cruz, the father of Senator Ted Cruz, gave a barn burner of a speech. You're now listening to Pastor Cruz.
I'll repeat it. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. Now let's define those terms. Able men. That means elect somebody who is capable of doing the job. Don't elect the village idiot. And by the way, when I'm talking about men, I'm talking about men and women. Number 2, such as fear God. Now that requires some explanation. What does it mean to fear God? Well, if you fear God, you obey God's precepts. And what does that mean? Well, first of all, you live by a moral code. For example, you defend the sanctity of life. But beyond the moral code, that means you live a life of integrity, honesty, hard work, individual responsibility, the rule of law, and yes, free enterprise and limited government. And the Bible has a lot to say about all those. So able men, such as fear God. Number 3, men of truth. Now, haven't we had enough men and women of lies in government? I mean, this administration will tell you one lie to cover up the previous lie. And whether it is Lois Lerner, or is Ron Emanuel, or is our illustrious Attorney General, or is our President, they go from lie to lie to lie to lie. It is about time that we have men and women of truth running for office, men and women of truth in public office. Now let me ask you a question. Haven't you had candidates that will tell you all kinds of things in their campaign, and when they get in office they do exactly the opposite? You know, it is about time that we stop listening to their rhetoric and we start looking at their record. Most of these politicians have a record. Jesus said, "Ye shall know them by their fruit." Stop listening to their rhetoric, look at their record. Don't do you any good to listen to a politician that tells you, "Oh yes, I'm pro-life," and they voted for abortion 17 times. Don't listen to what they say, look at what they do. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth. Number 4, hating covetousness. Now let me tell you something about covetousness in government. Covetousness in government is not so much about money as it is about power and control. These politicians covet power, and they covet the control that that power gives them. That's why we have politicians in Washington that have been there for 30 and 40 years, and they want to be there another 20. Because they covet that power. Able men, such as fear God, men of truth, hating covetousness. And then it continues, and it says, "And appoint them as rulers of 1,000, rulers of 100s, rulers of 50s, rulers of 10. So here is the hierarchy. Moses, rulers of 1,000, rulers of 100, rulers of 50s, rulers of 10. That's equivalent to federal government, state government, county government, local government. Verse 22. "And only take matters of great importance up to Moses. Everything else you handle yourself." In other words, at the local level. That is Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. That's the 9th Amendment and the 10th Amendment. The essence of federalism in 2 verses of Scripture. Article 1, Section 8, the 9th Amendment, the 10th Amendment. Article 1, Section 8 is called the enumerated powers of Congress. 18 powers enumerated in Article 1, Section 8. If it's not there, the federal government's got no business being involved in it. Let me give you a couple of examples of things that are not in Article 1, Section 8. Education. You don't find that anywhere in Article 1, Section 8. And isn't it absurd that a bunch of unelected bureaucrats in Washington will tell us how to educate our children and grandchildren? That decision needs to be with the local school board, with parents, and with teachers. If you follow Article 1, Section 8, the Department of Education is unconstitutional. The best thing we could do with it is abolish it, get rid of it. Let me tell you another word that is not in Article 1, Section 8. Environment. And I'll tell you what, if there is a single agency of the federal government that is most responsible for the economic malaise that we have in this country, that is doing more to destroy our country, destroy our economy, is the EPA. It's not in Article 1, Section 8. You draw the conclusion. So, let's go back to the Constitution. You know, it is not coincidental that the very first three words in the Constitution are "we the people." We the people. You see, when the framers designed this great American experiment, they did something that had never ever been done in the world. All other governments around the world were top-down governments, were ruled by a tyrant or a monarch. And the people were serfs of that government, under total control of that government. The framers turned that system right side up, and it became a bottom-up system, where we the people are the ones who govern. I'll tell you what, it's about time that we send a loud message to our politicians in Washington and our politicians in the state houses that they work for us, we don't work for them. Let me tell you, before I get onto the Declaration, let me share a couple more things with you about our history, which is not in the textbooks anymore. Do you know where Paul Revere was going when he was shouting, "The British are coming, the British are coming"? He was going to the home of a pastor by the name of Jonas Clark. At the home of Jonas Clark were two other patriots, John Hancock and Samuel Adams. Pastor Jonas Clark was one of many pastors, probably the most feared men by the British Army. They called them the Black Robe Regiment. These pastors wore long black robes. Many of them had the Continental Army uniform underneath the black robe. They would preach on Sunday and then take off that robe and with half their congregation go fight for our independence. Now my question again, where are those pastors today? I know we have a couple of exceptions here in this room, but most of those pastors are hiding behind their pulpit. As a matter of fact, the very first battle for our independence was the Battle of Lexington. Do you know who led the Battle of Lexington? Pastor Jonas Clark. You know who were his troops? The men from his congregation. That's our history. That's our heritage. To all those pastors that say, I don't want to get involved in politics. Let me tell you, of the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, 29 of them, over half of them, were seminary graduates. They were preachers. They were theologians. They were men of God. But you know, you get this statement. Again, I hear it quite often. Politics is a dirty business. I don't want any part of it. And they wash their hands like Pontius Pilate. You know, Proverbs chapter 29 verse 2 says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. When the wicked rule, people mourn. Now, if the righteous are not running for office, if the righteous are not even voting, what does that leave? That leaves the wicked electing the wicked. We get what we deserve. As a matter of fact, let me give you a statistic that is the reason why I'm doing all these pastors' conferences. Unfortunately, I only have the number for evangelical Christians. I don't have the numbers for Catholics, but I've talked to a Catholic bishop not too long ago. He told me the numbers are the same. The statistic that I heard for evangelical Christians was that in the United States there were approximately 65 million evangelical Christians. And that only 50% of those are registered to vote. And of the 50% that were registered to vote, only 50% voted in the last election. That means 75% of Christians stayed at home, didn't even vote. And the numbers are the same in the Catholic Church. We get what we deserve when we stay at home and we do not exercise our civic responsibility. But let me tell you the flip side. If the people of God would get involved, you just look at the numbers. As I said, I don't have the numbers for the Catholic Church, but among evangelical Christians, 50% and then 25%, we're talking about 48 million evangelical Christians sitting at home. Suppose we had 5% of those to vote, and to vote according to biblical principles. We could turn Massachusetts red in one election. We could turn every state in the Union red in one election. But it takes the people of God, the people of principle, to become part of the solution instead of whining and complaining. Let me tell you, if you don't vote, you have no right to complain. But it's not just voting, it's voting according to principles that you uphold. Principles should go above party. Let's stop being politically correct and let's start being biblically correct. Anyway, I want to finish by talking a little bit about the Declaration of Independence. And in the second paragraph of the preamble, it begins by saying, we hold these truths to be self-evident. The problem is, to those clowns in Washington, they're not very self-evident. It continues by saying that all men are created equal. Again, the problem with Washington is that some are more equal than others. We saw it with the bailouts that were just giving handouts to pay off political favors. Or we saw it with Solyndra, we saw it with General Motors, we saw it with General Electric. The biggest example of that is Obamacare. Here is a law that nobody wanted, that Nancy Pelosi said we have to pass it before we read it. Now they read it, now they're shocked, now they don't like it. But anyway, that Congress who passed the law, they want an exception. That the IRS, who are the enforcers of the law, they want an exception. That big business who finances this administration, they want an exception. That the labor unions who provide the foot soldiers for the campaigns of this administration, they want an exception. Well, what about we the people? What about we the people? You know, that's what that 22-hour filibuster of my son was all about. It was about fighting for the right of we the people. And you know, you read it probably 2,000 times. Ted Cruz shut down the government. That's not true. Harry Reid and Barack Obama shut down the government. You also hear on Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz really had done a lot of harm to the party. No, Ted Cruz brought Obamacare to the limelight and put it as a concern for the whole population. And as a result of that, the whole, as was said a little while ago, I think it was like Baker. The Democratic Party is scared to death. Or maybe it was you. The Democratic Party is scared to death. Let me tell you, the biggest blessings that the conservatives have received is Obamacare. Obamacare is the gift that keeps on giving. It is a nightmare of such proportions that is going to be the debacle and, the demise of the Democrats. And they are dumb enough that they are doubling down on Obamacare. And we are going to see unprecedented wins in 2014. Across the board, not only federally, but in every state legislature, we're going to see wins left and right. People are fed up. I see a young man, 10 years old over there. Unfortunately, I don't see too many other young kids here. But I will address this young man. Let me tell you something. Tell me your name one more time. Colin. Let me say something, Colin. I'm going to say something very serious. If we lose this fight, you will not have a future. That's how serious this fight is. I want each and every one of you to hear me. If we lose this fight, our children and our grandchildren will not have a future.
You're listening to Pastor Rafael Cruz. He recently gave a speech at an event sponsored by the Massachusetts Republican Assembly. Welcome to the Kuhner Report. Good morning, Boston. This is Jeff Kuhner, Boston's bulldozer, cleaning up the liberal bull. My friends, this is a special Memorial Day program. You'll be hearing me over the next couple of hours, and then Avi Nelson will be coming in at 8 o'clock to fill in for the Kuhner Man. My friends, today is obviously a very special day. It is Memorial Day. And we in this country created Memorial Day beautifully, rightly, patriotically to celebrate, honor, and commemorate our fallen heroes and military personnel. Those that paid the ultimate sacrifice in battle after battle, war after war in defense of this country. It is, to me, almost a sacred day. I'll be very candid with you. In the Kuhner household, we don't play music on Memorial Day. I encourage people in my home not to, for example, Ashton and Ava, not to be laughing too much. We don't celebrate very much. It's more of a solemn day. It's more of a mournful day. It's more of a day whereby we think about and honor the sacrifices made by the bravest of the brave and the most noblest of the noble. And before I get into the history of Memorial Day and why this day is so important, I just want to make a special recognition. There are a lot of veterans who listen to this show. Our audience has a lot of veterans. And I want to stress this to all of the veterans out there in particular. Jeff Kuhner is behind the microphone here at WRKO because of the sacrifices that you and your predecessors have made. Because of your willingness to fight and die for this republic, for our Constitution, for our very freedoms. This is why I have the liberty and the ability and the freedom to be behind a microphone today and do what is something so rare and so special and almost unheard of. very few countries in the world whereby somebody could stand on a major, in a booth, in a studio, on a major radio station, in a major market in America, heard on the internet by countless people across the country and even internationally, and criticize his government, and criticize the president, and criticize leading politicians and members of Congress, including the governor and state officials, and not be thrown in prison, not be executed, not be murdered, or not be tortured. What we have here in the United States of America, and it's a point I used to make to my students at McGill University over and over again, and it's something that it's a theme in my show and in my radio career. America is an exceptional nation. America is more than just a republic, although it is a republic. And it is more than a great nation, although it is a nation. It is ultimately an experiment. It is, I believe, the greatest experiment in human history, in self-government, in self-rule, and in human freedom and individual liberty. As Abraham Lincoln once famously put it, America is the last best hope of mankind. And what America has been since its inception in 1776 has been an attempt and an experiment in ordered individual liberty, whereby here in the United States of America, no matter what your background, no matter what your creed, no matter what your religion, no matter what your financial circumstances, no matter what the color of your skin, your racial or ethnic background, or who your parents were, or where your ancestors came from, if you're an American, you are a free man and woman. You are free to pursue your dreams. You are free to speak your mind. You are free to practice your faith. You are free to achieve anything you want to achieve. And that freedom that we take so for granted, and that I believe is now threatened and under assault by a Marxist and a socialist in the White House, whereby our precious liberties are being usurped and trampled on day after day after day. But that has been made possible because of you. Of you, the veterans, you in our military armed forces, who whenever the country called for you to answer the call of duty, you answered. Whenever you're asked to put your life and limb on the line, you do so. And for that, I want you to know that I thank you from the bottom of my heart. And that is why you have my word and my honor. You have a personal commitment from Jeff Kuhner on the heads of my two beautiful adopted children, who I love more than life itself, that you will have no stronger champion, no more ferocious advocate, no more staunch defender, whether it be on talk radio, in the media, in journalism, anywhere in the public sphere, than Jeff Kuhner. Because unlike many Americans, I have the experience and maybe even the privilege of having parents who didn't experience that freedom, who grew up in a communist system, who grew up behind the Iron Curtain, who were told they were slaves, where they were not given their freedoms, where in fact it was denied to them on a daily basis. Religious freedom, political freedom, economic freedom, personal freedom, everything that we take for granted. And on a day like today, my thoughts, my prayers are with those that never came back, are with those who on the beaches of Normandy, when young men, 18, 19, 20 years of age, with the whole world in front of them, landed in France to ultimately liberate Europe from Nazi occupation by Hitler's Germany. Where many young men, after the attacks on Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, including a man I've grown to know with disabled veterans, his name is Lou Pasquale. I had him on my show. I recently was at a golf tournament sponsored by Liberty Mutual, and RKO was involved as well, to help honor disabled veterans, so for a day at least they could play golf. There was Lou. When he was 16 years of age, he lied about his age when Pearl Harbor took place, so that he could serve in the military. He volunteered and served in our military and went into the islands of the Pacific, battling disease and Japanese kamikaze attacks to defeat fascist Imperial Japan. How many boys, 58,000, never came home from the jungles of Vietnam? They didn't ask to go. The government drafted them. The government kicked down basically their door and said, your country is calling you. And they went. And unlike the charlatans like Bill Clinton and these other draft dodgers, these cowardly anti-war peaceniks, those brave soldiers went and they fought and they died. And they died to defeat totalitarian communism. They died to defeat the greatest system of mass murder the world has ever seen. And I think about the boys who never came back, and the girls, from Iraq and Afghanistan, many of whom are still fighting in the caves and mountains of Afghanistan. There are no parades for them. There's no confetti for them. There's no dinners in their honor for them. There's no football games for them. There's no Christmas or Easter or family gatherings for them. Those that died are 6 feet under the ground. They're never going to come back home. They paid the ultimate price for us. And we should never take our freedoms and our liberties, what we have in this country, ever for granted. And we should always remember that the freedoms and liberties and the prosperity, the opportunities that we enjoy, somebody else sacrificed for them, for us to have them. Someone died. Someone paid the ultimate price. A veteran, a Marine, a Navy SEAL, an Army Ranger, a grunt, an Air Force pilot, someone in the Coast Guard, all of our services. We are the last best hope of mankind. Here, I honestly believe, is where the future of human freedom will be decided. Here is where you shall see a city upon a hill. Here is where millions of people from all over the world, whether they came from Ireland or Italy or Poland or Croatia or Russia or Vietnam or China or Latin America or Africa or wherever they came from, came here to be on free soil and to breathe fresh air. The air of freedom. And that was made possible by the brave, courageous sacrifices of our young men and women throughout our history. After a 7-year brutal insurgency and war, American patriots stunned the world by not only declaring American independence, not only saying that these 13 colonies, where people fled religious persecution from the old country, to come here and breathe the air of freedom, to practice their faith unmolested, unpersecuted, unharassed. They challenged the superpower of the time, the mighty British Empire, and King George III. Britain's empire was so powerful, so vast, it was said the sun never set on the Union Jack. They had so many colonial possessions, their navy was so powerful, their economic and military might unrivaled, that literally the sun never set on the Union Jack. That's how many colonies, that's what a kind of global superpower Britain was. And yet a band of colonists, of patriots, of men and women who loved freedom and pledged their honor and their treasure and their very lives, achieved the greatest republic in the history of the world. Benjamin Franklin at the peace talks which finally concluded the war against Britain. When finally American independence was secured, was asked by journalists at the time as he left the Treaty of Paris, on his way back to America, what have you secured? What have you Americans won? What have you given the world? And Benjamin Franklin said, I have given you a republic, if you can keep it. This republic has survived generation to generation to generation because of the sacrifices made, the ultimate sacrifices made by our men and women in our armed forces. For that, I thank you, I salute you, I honor you, and I want you to know from the depths of Kuhner country, we will never forget you. A Memorial Day special program. You'll be hearing the Kuhner Man throughout this hour, next hour. And of course, we're going to have Avi Nelson come in at 8 o'clock. He'll be filling in for me from 8 till 10. Happy Memorial Day to everybody, especially to our troops. You know, when we honor the dead, and we honor those who have fallen in service of our country on battlefields all across the world, I want to talk about, for the next couple of minutes, to a group that's often been forgotten. Our World War II vets, rightly, have been honored and celebrated, glorified in Hollywood movies, on television shows. They have gotten the recognition and their due that they deserve. And even, Iraq and Afghanistan, not so much, but even they, will get some recognition, and people will at least honor, to some degree, the sacrifices that our vets have made, our military people have made, in Afghanistan and Iraq. But the one group of people that were vilified then and have continued to be vilified to this day, in movie after movie, TV program after TV program, popular culture reference after popular culture reference, are our boys who fought, served, and died in Vietnam. Our Vietnam veterans have had their reputations and good name dragged through the mud. And many of you remember Secretary, well, he was then a anti-war protester, but current Secretary of State, Jean-François Carey, a.k.a. Pepe Le Pew, Pepe, going in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and slanderously libeling and smearing our troops, saying that Vietnam vets went into our boys in Vietnam U.S. forces in Vietnam went in village after village, massacring people, murdering people, killing women and children, electrocuting people, committing atrocity after atrocity after atrocity. He said in village after village, battle after battle after battle. He lied. He deliberately lied. He slandered our troops. He demonized our troops. He essentially spat on our troops in order to ingratiate himself with the anti-war liberal left that was then slowly coming to dominate the Democratic Party. And for Jean-Francois, that's where his political career, he believed, lay. And so the truth was sacrificed to anti-war leftist propaganda. The reality, my friends, is the exact opposite. And if no one else has the guts to say it, the Kuhner man's going to say it. Vietnam was one of the most just, moral wars in human history. Let me repeat that, because to many people this is going to seem very radical, very shocking. It's verboten to speak the truth about Vietnam in today's liberal America, or really for the last 40 years. Because the Marxists and communists and socialists who have taken over Hollywood and academia and the media want you to believe that somehow this was a criminal, misguided war led by war criminals like Richard Nixon, in which drug-addicted psychopaths went through the jungles of Vietnam, Americans slaughtering Vietnamese civilians, old people, the elderly, women, children, you name it. Here, a movie by Oliver Stone, that Castro-loving Marxist. Platoon, which at the time was a huge seller, huge box office smash. At the end of the movie, they show bodies, almost like Auschwitz, being dumped into mass pits by Americans on bulldozers. Claiming that Americans went into village after the movie depicts American soldiers, Charlie Sheen, William Dafoe, all these other characters, going into villages, into huts, raping 7, 8, 9-year-old little girls. BS. Hokum. Balderdash. I have to be careful. I'm on the air. I got to be careful the kind of language that I use. Why were we in Vietnam? Why was Vietnam such a just war? Because the North Vietnamese were bent on aggression against the South Vietnamese. And in the North, backed by the Soviet Union and Communist China, the North established a totalitarian state where hundreds of thousands of people were murdered and massacred and placed into concentration camps and slave labor camps. And when we finally left that war, because of the cowardly politicians in Washington, here is what the left will never tell you. South Vietnam became a giant graveyard. The ethnic Chinese were expelled. Property was confiscated. Countless South Vietnamese were butchered and murdered and starved to death. It was so bad that there were nearly 1 million South Vietnamese who fled on makeshift rafts out in the South China Sea. They were called the boat people, looking to go anywhere else but Vietnam to save themselves and their families. And then, after having consolidated their control in Vietnam, the Vietnamese communists then invaded Laos, where the Hmong tribe, one of our close allies, were literally exterminated. Cambodia went communist. Much of Southeast Asia went communist. And in the wake of this, my friends, millions of South Asians, millions of Cambodians, of Vietnamese, of people in Laos, the Hmong people, were killed and murdered in one of the most grisly genocides of the 20th century. To the Vietnam War vets, you fought against the greatest system of evil the world has ever seen. Communism. And after you left, the rampaging, triumphant communists committed a Holocaust in Southeast Asia. You, my friends, were liberators. You were freedom fighters. You fought against the most evil system and ideology that the world has ever seen. And rather than being called baby killers, rather than being called war criminals, you were heroes. You were one of the greatest warriors and one of the greatest heroes this country has ever seen. And for your service, and for your courage, and for your bravery, and for your self-sacrifice, I want you to know that I and many freedom-loving people all across Southeast Asia thank you and salute you. This is Jeff Kuhner, Boston's bulldozer, cleaning up the liberal bull. My friends, I'm up against it. I got a hard break. Coming up next, more of our special Memorial Day program here on AM 680 WRKO.
I lost a lot of good buddies over there.
Remembering the fallen on Memorial Day.
But I'm proud I got to serve with them.
On AM 680 WRKO.
Welcome back to the Kuhner Report. Jeff Kuhner, Boston's bulldozer, here on the great WRKO AM 680. Special Memorial Day program today. Avi Nelson will be coming in at 8 o'clock to fill in for the Kuhner Man. Today is a day where we honor our fallen dead, our military heroes. And, my friends, I got to tell you, to me, it is a sad, tragic statement on the state of modern-day America today, that as we are celebrating the ultimate and remembering and commemorating and honoring the sacrifices made by our military veterans and those that paid the ultimate price, that as this is going on, the Obama administration and their leader are engulfed in maybe the most serious scandal of his entire presidency. I know it's tough to choose which one is the worst. Benghazi, the IRS, the NSA, Obamacare, Fast and Furious. But the VA, if it's not number one, it's certainly up there. And I want you to think about this. What kind of a country are we? Whereby we send our men and women off to wars, where they go and land on the beaches of Normandy, or the islands in the Pacific, or the jungles of Vietnam, or in one hellhole after another in Iraq, or the caves and mountains of Afghanistan. And those that are lucky enough to make it back, if they're not 6 feet underneath the ground, who come back maimed, crippled, suffering severe PTSD, traumatic brain injury, the list goes on. In Vietnam, Agent Orange, many of them, their insides just withering away from cancer. And then, after all the sacrifices they've made, seeing their friends and comrades and brothers in arms not come back, everything they had to endure, putting their very life and limb on the line, and then when they come back, they're put to the back of the line? They're treated almost like dogs? Many dogs in this country, I'm telling you from their dog owners, are treated better than many of our military vets. It's incredible. And so, then when they need their country, when it's time to finally give to them, take care of them after they've given to us and sacrificed for us and put their lives on the line for us, many of whom, by the way, will never be the same again. Here, I'll just give you a quick example. Just a very quick example. And it changed my view on war. It changed my view on military interventionism. It's where I became an America First nationalist, where I said enough of these interventions all over the world. America is not and should not be the world's policeman. It was maybe 2008, 2009. We were still in Iraq. The dear leader had been elected, but he kept saying that Iraq was the bad war. That was the unnecessary war. That was the war of, quote, choice, that he said, as he termed it. The real war, the necessary war, quote unquote, was the one in Afghanistan. So already then he was pulling the troops out of Iraq. We were leaving with our tails between our legs, but let that go. And I remember I was at a Tea Party rally in southwest Pennsylvania. And I'll never forget this. My wife Grace was there. There was a huge crowd. People already were sensing that Obama was a socialist and trying to impose his radical agenda upon the country. And so they asked me to speak, and I gratefully did it. And before I got on stage to speak, they always like to honor the troops and our vets at a lot of these Tea Party rallies. And so they asked a young man, he was 22 years of age. He had served 2 tours in Iraq. Near the end of his second tour, he encountered an IED, an improvised explosive device, set up by an Al-Qaeda jihadist. It blew off his entire right leg. All of it, gone. And he had a prosthetic limb. He had a fake leg, an artificial leg. And it's, how do I describe this? The guy was about 6'3", 6'4", this young man. He almost looked like Rambo. And what I mean is, he was broad-shouldered, he was muscular. Apparently he was a phenomenal high school football player, you can just tell. You can just tell he was a phenomenal athlete. But he said to me, we're just chatting, and he said after 9/11, he never forgot what the terrorists and the jihadists did to us. And so when we went to war in Iraq, now that he was, more than 18 years of age, he said, you know what, I want to serve my country. I want to go after those that brought down the Twin Towers and that are plotting and striving and seeking to kill Americans every day. And so he enlisted. He volunteered. And he served 1 tour, and then he served a second tour. And his girlfriend was there. She was very young, pretty young girl. And I was talking to him. He had a very hard handshake. You can tell, I don't know, he was a warrior. He was a gladiator. This man could have been maybe a professional athlete, a police officer, a fireman. And he stood there, and there were 5 wooden steps to get up to the stage. And so we chatted, and they said they called up his name, and he started to walk. And he had a hard time walking up the stairs, but he made it. And then he was just telling everybody in the crowd how he served in Iraq, how he loves America, and that what he wants now is for us to be unified and united. That we have to understand the threat of radical Islam. That for the Islamists, this is a life-death struggle. This is a war to the finish. And for them, we are the great Satan. And they don't care whether you're white, black, brown, whatever color of your skin, young, old, liberal, conservative, Republican, Democrat. If they see you, well, we saw it at the Boston bombings. If they can attack you, maim you, and kill you, they will. If they can slit your throat, they will. And so he made a plea for us to be vigilant. And he made a plea to the president not to turn his back on the troops. And it was very emotional. But then I'll never forget this, because at that moment, there's just something that just struck me. He then tried to walk down the stairs with his artificial leg. And he couldn't do it. He was struggling. And his girlfriend started to tear up. And then a couple of men helped him. I went up as well on the steps. We're holding him by his arms. And we're helping him almost like he was a baby go down those steps. One after another after another. And you can tell he didn't say anything. He's a proud man. But I could see it on his face and on his eyes. He was embarrassed. He was humiliated. Because his leg is gone. He's never going to be the same again. Now, he's going to try to overcome it. He's a warrior. He's a fighter. He's a man of courage and bravery and honor. I understand that. But you see, when the generals come home and the politicians come home and they write their memoirs, and when the parades are over and our flag waving is over, that man is still not going to have his leg. His real leg. It's gone. And his girlfriend, who I assume is probably his wife now, she's going to have to take care of him for the rest of his life. And he's going to struggle going upstairs and downstairs for the rest of his life. And you mean to tell me, when this man comes home, he lost his leg. He gave his right leg. He could have leapt those stairs just a couple years before. Now he can barely go up and down them. That when he needs us, he's put to the back of the line? He's got to wait 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 months to get care? And how many others like him? No way. No way. My friends, this VA scandal ultimately is not even about Obama or his entire corrupt administration. It's about who we are as a people and as a nation. And when it comes to health care and taking care of our returning vets and our returning troops, they don't go to the back of the line. They go to the front of the line. This is Jeff Kuhner, Boston's Bulldozer, special Memorial Day program. Don't touch that dial. We'll have a lot more coming up next. Welcome back to the Kuhner Report. Jeff Kuhner, Boston's Bulldozer. 617-266-6868 is the number. Special Memorial Day program. Avi Nelson will be coming in at 8 o'clock to fill in for the Kuhner Man. Today, we honor and celebrate and commemorate our fallen dead, our great military heroes, those that gave their lives for this country in war after war on behalf of our freedoms and on behalf of our liberty. And I got to tell you, my friends, it's a shame that with the World War II generation slowly passing away, as they get older and older and older, and sadly many more continue to die off, we forget the greatness, the valor, the courage that they demonstrated during really the pivotal war of the 20th century. December 7th, 1941. A day, as Franklin Roosevelt put it, will live in infamy. The Imperial Japanese military, emboldened by conquest after conquest after conquest in the Pacific, as the Japanese ran wild in China, in Korea, in the Philippines, in island after island, as they were building up a fascist empire in the East, made the fatal mistake of World War II. Emboldened by their success, drunk with power and arrogance, led by their most brilliant military strategist, Admiral Yamamoto, the Japanese on December 7th launched a devastating attack against our Pacific Fleet. And when everything was said and done, America's Pacific Fleet was essentially destroyed. Bodies everywhere. America had been attacked. Immediately the country rallied. And something that today you will not see, and I don't think we'll ever see again, at least in our lifetime. There was such an outpouring of patriotism that literally when news hit the streets, whether it be in Boston or New York or Atlanta or Chicago or Los Angeles or Houston or Dallas or whatever, all cities and points in between, young men were lining up. You could see them going around block after block after block to volunteer. And during the 1930s, fascism was on the march. The Japanese had invaded China, they had invaded Manchuria, and they now were determined to build an Asian empire. But the real ultimate threat didn't come from the East, it came from the West. And in the ancient land of Germany, a small, strutting, wannabe generalissimo, a corporal, Adolf Hitler, had now entrenched himself in power in Germany. And he was putting together a Nazi movement that now the liberals disown and try to sweep under the rug their collaboration with. But during the 1930s, they adored, they celebrated, and they glorified. And Hitler said he was going to put all Germans into one state. Germany for the Germans, as he put it. But his real goal was not a greater Germany. It was a European-wide empire. And slowly but surely, he began to take back lands that had been stolen from Germany after the First World War at the Treaty of Versailles. And he wanted the Sudetenland in 1938, an area that was ethnically German, but then part of Czechoslovakia. And as he told the world, this is my last territorial demand. And so the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, egged on and cheered on by Franklin Roosevelt and the American liberal left, met with that strutting wannabe corporal, that fascist dictator Hitler, and came back with a piece of paper, appeasement, the Munich Agreement. And he waved it to enthusiastic people all across England and the world. As he put it, I have given us peace in our time. What he had really done was now guaranteed a major world war. Because now Hitler took the measure of Chamberlain, and he took the measure of FDR, and he took the measure of the appeasniks in the West. And as he told his propaganda minister, Joseph Goebbels, I have met the enemy. They are little ants and bugs, and I will squash them. And so now Hitler unleashed his Wehrmacht, his German military. And they swept into Poland and crushed the courageous Poles. And then along with Joseph Stalin, the Soviet dictator, they sliced up and carved up Poland. Then Hitler went on the war march. He went on the warpath. France fell. Belgium fell. Denmark fell. Holland fell. Greece fell. Romania fell. Yugoslavia fell. Bulgaria fell. Like dominoes, one country after another fell. And the only man who saw through Hitler, the only man who was in the wilderness for a decade, who said this man does not want peace, he wants war, and he wants world war, was none other than Winston Churchill. And finally, the man that the British public had insulted and reviled, now they turned to Churchill in their moment of need, in their desperate hour, to save England and the West from the nightmare of fascist occupation. And Churchill got up in the British Parliament, when he now is seated to the Prime Minister's office, and said, I have nothing to offer but blood, sweat, and tears. And privately he wrote, there is only one country that can save England and the West from a Nazi nightmare, from the end of civilization, and that is America. And for nearly a year and a half, the British, almost alone, held out against Hitler. And then December 7th, 1941 occurred. My grandfather was then living in fascist-occupied Europe, and I'll never forget the story that he told me. When he heard now that America was in the war, he went on his hands and knees. He fell to his knees. He cried. And he thanked the Lord. Because he said, now, with America in the war, we will win and we will be free. My friends, we saved the world. We saved the world from an unimaginable evil and tyranny. And that was done with the sacrifice and the courage of all of those brave men and women who served in World War II, many of whom never came home. To all of our fallen heroes and troops, from the bottom of my heart, from the bottom of my family's heart, and I know my grandfather is saying this from heaven, may God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
News at the top and bottom, talk in between.
Why don't view us as the Republican base? I view us as American citizens.
This is AM 680 WRKO, Boston.